Last week, we looked at coasters whose bite is bigger than their bark. These coasters don't dominate the skyline. They're small or mid-sized coasters that pack a huge punch. Today, let's turn that on its head. What coasters out there look great on paper, but by the time you get off, it leaves you wishing there was more. Let's run down my credit list and find all the paper tigers in the theme park world. These are the coasters that are all bark and no bite. I didn't have as many options to choose from this time. There were so many coasters out there that had a lot of bite despite having no bark. If you think I'm whiny and annoying based on this video, I'm sorry. Check out that video if you want to see some positivity. From my list, I only found 19 options for this list. Let's run down the 4 that missed my top 15. 2 of them belong together, Behemoth at Canada's Wonderland and Thunderstriker at Carowinds. These are pretty much the same rides. Behemoth may be a bit less trimmed, but they both have that long train with staggered seating, an out and back layout full of big camelbacks. And where people might be afraid of these coasters standing around 230 feet tall, they really don't have any intensity to speak of. They both end with weak helices after the mid-course, and their main goal is to shell out mild sustained floater airtime, and they do their job. Hang time towers over the Knott's Berry Farm boardwalk at 150 feet, almost 2,200 feet of twisted track, but this doesn't have a lot of force. You get some kick over the first drop, a quick pop of ejector after the cutback, but aside from that, the ride goes through the motions. You don't see that with too many Gerslauers. Last one, Wavebreaker at SeaWorld San Antonio. It is one of Intamin's family launch coasters. These usually have straddled seating, but even with those low expectations, this lacked any punch. Some of these coasters are better than others, but ever since my first ride on this, I've just felt this is more mild than most kiddie coasters, even with the 61-foot max height and 2 launches. Number 15, Shredder at Nickelodeon Universe. You can find these Gerslauer spinners all over the place, and I think they're a lot of fun. They're about 1,300 feet long, but if you get a car off balance, they spin like crazy. I had high hopes for Shredder, this being 85 feet tall, about 30 feet above the standard model, and almost 1,000 more feet of track. This is truly a super-sized Gerslauer spinner, but it ran nowhere even close to what you would expect. Almost twice as tall and twice as long, but it was a real snooze fest. The train ran so slow across the course, and there wasn't a whole lot of spinning. This is a custom model, and this was built to intertwine with Shellraiser, so it's possible that layout was a victim of circumstance, focusing more on avoiding Shellraiser than packing in good elements. Number 14, The Boss at Six Flags St. Louis. When I was just getting into coasters, this was such a big deal. A CCI wooden coaster starting with a 150-foot drop, over 4,600 feet of track, one of the biggest wooden coasters in the world. Maybe when it opened, it was smooth and exciting, or at least smooth. These days, it beats my brains out. I can ride it once, but if I wanted a second lap, I have to wait a few hours. If you can marathon this thing, more power to you. I don't know how you do it. It's not just rough though. I found the layout to be kinda boring. It doesn't pack in the positives, or negatives, or laterals. It just has big drops and swooping turns. It's kind of a similar story to Darien Lake's Predator. Its roughness makes you think it has some bite, but once you smooth it out, it doesn't have much else to offer. For this reason, I think RMC needs to take the project. A simple retrack would not turn this into a great ride. Number 13, Ride of Steel at Six Flags Darien Lake. I may have spared Predator, but its neighbor Ride of Steel isn't so lucky. This was Intamin's first mega coaster, basically their version of a Hyper, this standing 208 feet tall, and it looks like it has sharp airtime and intense helices. Based on my rides in 2023, the airtime hills didn't do much, and those helices are way too drawn out to pull any positive Gs. The one thing it did bring was a hefty rattle, so I don't know. Maybe it's having a bad year, or that's just how it is now. But you see this monster 208-foot coaster as you drive in. You realize the Moto coaster has more force than this mega coaster. Number 12, Speed Monster at Tusenfryd. When you pull in the Tusenfryd and go up that escalator, you see Speed Monster's Norwegian loop right above your head. The Intamin Accelerator from 2006, a model known for its intense launches, sharp airtime, whippy inversions, and Speed Monster has none of that. Its launch goes from 0 to 53 miles an hour in 2.2 seconds, and by the time it rises up into its first inversion, it loses a lot of speed. That makes the whole course pretty forceless. Definitely something you would not expect from an Intamin Accelerator. Number 11, Timberhawk Ride of Prey at Wild Waves. I'm sorry I pick on this coaster so much, but when you're talking about coasters with bark and no bite, you can't not talk about Timberhawk. It has an intimidating presence in the back of Wild Waves. This park not having much to offer. It's mainly a water park but has a few decent rides. And this 75 foot tall, 2,600 foot long S&S wooden coaster is just looming back there. I rode this 5 years ago, and even though it ran smooth, the elements are shockingly dull. Everything is so drawn out, there's no force on any of the drops. It almost seems like it doesn't need upstop wheels. Number 10. Jersey Devil Coaster at Six Flags Great Adventure. Again, I'm sorry I pick on this coaster so much, but if you saw my all bite and no bark video, I put the original RMC Raptors high on that list. Those rip you in half and only stand about 100 feet tall. Jersey Devil is 130 feet tall, but it just glides over its 3,000 feet of track. All that power from the smaller Raptors is missing. This just going through its motions, the best element being that stall, just because it's going so slow and you get some nice sustained hang time. It was especially slow on my first ride in 2021, and I got back in 2024 and got a better ride, but I still maintain this as the worst RMC. However, not the highest RMC on this list. Number 9. Silver Bullet at Knott's Berry Farm. If you have any experience with B&M inverts, you know they pack in the intensity. Those inversions and tight turns try to rip your shoes off. And in this case, you have the big ones that are super intense, like Alpengeist, and the small ones that are super intense, like the Bat Clones. Silver Bullet is on the bigger side, 146 feet tall, starting with that shallow 109 foot drop into a sprawling 6 inversion course, and this one's pretty easy going. It does end with a nice upward helix, but aside from that, you're just cruising over the footpaths in the lake, and that might kinda be the problem. It wasn't designed to maximize intensity, it was designed to fit on a non-existent plot of land, maintaining clearances and having enough speed to go through its elements. If you want a good starter invert, don't be fooled by Magic Mountain's Batman. It's small, but will drain the blood from your brain. Go down the 5 freeway and check out the bigger, longer, but much less intense Silver Bullet. Number 8. Yukon Striker at Canada's Wonderland. These B&M dives don't have the best reputation when it comes to intensity. That's one reason the general public loves them so much. They're easy going, they have that vertical drop, big inversions, funky looking trains, and for me, they're hit and miss. I've always enjoyed the bigger ones over the smaller ones, so I thought Yukon Striker was going to be awesome, but it just didn't do anything for me. Well, it did have an intense vertical loop, but aside from that, I wanted to like it, but it just wasn't there. You would think a 245 foot vertical drop into an underwater tunnel, followed by 4 inversions would be a killer ride, but this dog doesn't bite. Number 7. New Texas Giant at Six Flags Over Texas. It could just be me, but this ride seems to be getting worse every year. It seems like as it gets more rattly, it gets slower. You see this 153 foot tall, 4,200 foot long hybrid, that red track on a wood structure, a 79-degree drop, big overbanks, airtime hills, and you can tell this was the first RMC. The ones that came after have whippy inversions and sharp airtime hills, and New Texas Giant does have a good one before the mid-course, but the first half is disappointing and the second half is just slow. This is the part that used to give me something, but as of late, I don't leave my seat even a little bit. New Texas Giant is one of the best looking RMCs. Sometimes it's confused for Steel Vengeance. I just wish it rode as well as it looks. Number 6. Apollo's Chariot at Busch Gardens Williamsburg. Just like New Texas Giant was RMC's first project, Apollo was B&M's first hyper, and it seems like they were trying to figure it out. You see this towering above the park when you pull into the parking lot. 170 feet, but the drop is even longer at 210 feet. And if you've ridden other B&M hypers and come back around to this one, you realize how little bite this has. Every other B&M hyper I've ridden has good airtime. Apollo's is very mild at best. It's a shame, it's got a great setting away from the park, a standard out and back layout full of airtime hills, but it seems like they're just too tall to bring the negative G's. Just like Raging Bull, this has a 9-car train, a pre-drop, and a 65-degree drop. But where Raging Bull tosses you into Lake Michigan, you barely get anything on Apollo. It makes no sense. Number 5. Wild Thing at Valley Fair. You could also include Steel Force at Dorney Park, or even Mamba at Worlds of Fun. Although, without the trims on, that finale is pretty good. Wild Thing is the weakest of the Morgan hypers in my opinion, so I'm giving it the spot on this list. This 207 foot hyper sits on the road going to the park. That bright green track looking awesome, but once you're on, you find that drop doesn't have any airtime. The first camelback is pretty mild, and then you go into some swooping turns. You feel the speed, but that's about it. And when you hit the mid-course brake run, it's all over. You got airtime hills going back to the station, but it might as well be straight track. The lower tier Cedar Fair parks all got Morgan hypers in the late 90s. Worlds of Fun, Dorney Park, Valley Fair, and before Cedar Fair even owned the park, Michigan's Adventure was also set to get one, but that never happened. Number 4. Steel Curtain at Kennywood. It's impossible not to be intrigued by Steel Curtain. 220 feet tall, that first inversion being the tallest in the world. 9 interesting inversions, that's setting a North American record. This ride has had a lot of problems since it opened in 2019, but I was able to snag one ride in 2021, and the whole time I was just waiting for something to happen. It was 4,000 feet of forcelessness. I mean, the ride was fine. It had a dull rattle, which was weird for a new coaster, but it just flips you around. Nothing in terms of intensity, a little bit of hang time. Just a whole lot of nothing for a coaster that menacing. Number 3, Millennium Force at Cedar Point. Some of you probably hate me for this, and some of you probably wholeheartedly agree. This was the biggest deal when it opened in 2000. A coaster nobody had ever seen before. The world's first 300-foot drop, a 6,600-foot course with overbanks and airtime hills. I got swept up in that frenzy after it opened, and for a time, it was my number 2 coaster. I still enjoy it, but it seems like every other time I ride it, I come off disappointed. The first drop in the back row has some airtime. The first overbank can make you gray out, but those 2 big airtime hills barely offer anything. The overbanks are repetitive and forceless, and the ride is more of a cool tour around the big island of Cedar Point, not really an elite coaster experience. I can't imagine that was the intention when Intamin designed this monster that has come to be one of the world's most iconic coasters. Number 2, Goliath at Six Flags Magic Mountain. If you didn't see this coming, you must not watch my channel. I always complain about my former home park Hyper, and how Giovanola took something with tons of potential and did nothing with it. It may have a 255-foot drop and 4,500 feet of track, but it's entirely forceless except for 2 moments. The drawn-out airtime hill offering some mild floater, and the final helix that has been neutered by the mid-course brake run. Goliath is the first thing you notice when you park, watching riders tumble down a 61-degree drop when you get out of your car. But when you hit the brake run, you can't help but think the ride wasn't very good. Smooth, but just nothing going on. Number 1, Superman Escape from Krypton at Six Flags Magic Mountain. If Goliath isn't the first thing that you notice when you enter the parking lot, it's Superman. In fact, you can see Superman from all over town. It's 415 feet tall, but that's not even the main reason it has bark. It might be the loudest coaster in the world. It sounds like a fighter jet passing over your head. So you have this ultra loud, 100 mile an hour, 415 foot coaster, and it's just a whole lot of nothing. It takes 7 seconds to get up to speed, and you just rise up the tower and head back down. Either going forward or backward, it doesn't make much difference. It's not a bad ride, just not worth waiting more than 10 minutes for. And when you weigh the height, speed, and noise of this coaster against the thrill factor, I think it deserves number 1 on this list. So there you go. Thanks for putting up with like 13 or 14 minutes of me whining. If you have any thoughts, any agreements or disagreements, and if you have a coaster that stands out as all bark and no bite, let me know in the comments below. Also, don't forget, for a more positive spin, click the card in my end screen for the coasters that have no bark but a heck of a lot of bite. If you enjoyed this video, please drop a like, and if you're new here and love coasters, please give me a sub. Also, if you have your own channel and need copyright-free off-ride footage, be sure to check out my second channel. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all next time.